You know what's kind of wild? There was a time when making a mixtape was an actual event, not a playlist, not send me a link. A mixtape meant you had to work for it. You'd sit there with a blank cassette, side A, side B, and you had a plan in your head that was way more serious than anyone else in the room realized. You'd write the track list in tiny handwriting, maybe you decorated the label, maybe you used a good pen because this one mattered. And then you'd hit record, and everything became high stakes. Because the song had to start clean. The timing had to fit, and if it didn't, you weren't just skipping a track, you were rewriting the whole vibe. And the best part is, a mixtape wasn't just music. It was a memory you wanted to replay on demand. A summer night, a long drive with the windows down, maybe something you could just see in your head like it happened yesterday. But here's the thing. A mixtape wasn't the original album. It wasn't the greatest hits version either. It was your version of the memory. Same songs, same era, same feeling, but reframed into something personal. Something you could pop in and instantly say, yep, we're back there. And that's exactly how I approach tabletop sports projects. And even when I replay a season, I'm not trying to recreate history like a museum exhibit. I'm chasing a memory and then asking one simple question. What if it went differently? What if I managed that team? What if the rosters changed? What if the league looked familiar, but the story didn't? Today's episode is all about that. Why I love the mixtape approach to replay projects. Why it works for me, and why it's totally a different experience from pure historical replays, all-time greats leagues, or fully fictional setups. This is the Tabletop Sportcast. Welcome back to the Tabletop Sportcast. I'm James Cast. This is the show where we talk tabletop sports gaming through interviews, game reviews, and project planning. Basically, the hobby side of sports, where we don't just watch stories, we play them. Today is a quick, focused topic episode, and it's something I've realized about my own style as a gamer. Here's the music analogy that finally made it click. A pure historical replay, it's like listening to the original album front to back, in order, honoring it exactly as released. An all-time greats project can feel like a greatest hits compilation. Big moments, stacked track list. Sometimes you lose the context that made those moments hit so hard. A fully fictional league is like writing your own songs. It's creative, it's fun, but it's a different kind of satisfaction. What I do most often, it's the mixtape. It's the same era, it's the same players, specifically that season's version of those players, but I'm curating the experience so the project becomes mine. And I want to break this down in a helpful way, first by defining what this approach is not, and then bringing it home with what it is. Let me say this up front. I respect pure historical replays a lot. They're one of the best ways to test a game system or experience a season you love and see if the outcomes feel realistic. And for some people, that's the whole joy. Faithfully recreating what happened and seeing it unfold. But the reason I don't live there is simple. I want ownership. In a pure replay, the season already has an expected shape. Even if I'm not trying to force results, I can still feel the gravity of what should happen. And when that's in the room, my decisions don't feel as heavy. And I don't want my tabletop time to feel like I'm verifying history. I want it to feel like I'm making choices that matter. I don't just want results, I want responsibility. And I'm not looking for the all-time greatest hits universe either. Because this is another one where I totally get the appeal. All-time great leagues can be unbelievably fun. But for me, they often lose the two things I care about most. First, the era context. When you strip out the season-specific environment, you lose the sound of the era. You lose the style, the rhythm, the norms. Sports change, rules change, strategies change. Talent distribution changes. And I like when a project feels like that year. Second, and this might be the bigger one, you lose the ecosystem. In a real season, you have a mix. You have great players. You have good players. You have average players, bad players, and yeah, some terrible ones. And that mix is like the oxygen. Because the bottom of the league matters. The mediocre teams matter. The specialists matter. The replacement level guys matter. That's what makes greatness visible. If everyone is great, greatness gets blurry. So no, I don't really want a greatest hits album when I sit down and do a project. I want the full record, filter tracks and all, because that's what makes the hits matter. And when you look at a fully fictional league, it's also not really what I'm looking for. And this is important because it's easy to hear what if and assume it's basically just fictional league mode. But that's not what I'm chasing. I still want the real players that I remember, behaving like the players I remember, in the statistical neighborhood that feels right for that season. I want that kind of like, oh yeah, that's him feeling. So the surprise I'm looking for isn't, why is this player unrecognizable? The surprise I want is, what happens when I change the context while the identity stays intact? I want surprise in the standings and then the final results, not necessarily confusion in the player performances. So that kind of frames up like what this really isn't. But what is it? Well, it's not a pure replay. It's not an all-time greats, and it's not fully fictional. So what is it? Here's my definition. It's more like an alternate history. I'm using the real players from a real season in a real feeling era, but I want to change one or two variables so the story becomes mine. And that's where the mixtape feel comes in. It's the same songs, just maybe in a different track order. But to keep a what if from turning into like total chaos, I need to try to keep a few guardrails. The first one is to season lock the identity. I'm not trying to look at career composites. This isn't legend mode. I want this season's version of the player. Guardrail 2. I'm going to lock in the era environment. This league should still sound like that year. The distribution, the scoring environment, the style, it still matters. Guardrail 3, I need to mix up the quality in the ecosystem. I want the full range in the league. That contrast is what makes the project feel alive. Fourth guardrail, limit the twist. I usually change one big thing or a couple small things. I don't want to do a total rewrite. So what are the actual levers that help me kind of create that mixtape feel? Well, here's a few that kind of fit my lane. One, I'll try to manage one team. I use history as the backdrop, but then I get to make my own choices. If it's a baseball season, maybe I'm using different lineups. Maybe my rotation looks different than what they actually used. I get to decide, like, does that bench player become a starter, right? I'm going to do it within context, but I get to, bend the rules just a little bit so that I can make this team live through an identity that I would have expected. Another thing I might try to do is just do a redraft from the season pool. Same era of talent, but now I have new chemistry, new matchups, right? I get to see these players in a very different light. Maybe I didn't really like the makeup of my particular favorite team that particular season, so I'm going to switch up the talent levels a little bit. We're going to redraft. We're going to see if we can balance the playing pool a little bit differently. Sometimes I like to do like a realignment or schedule tweaks. Maybe it was, again, like, NFL season, and maybe I didn't like the schedule the team had that year. So we're going to have them have a slightly different schedule. Or maybe I have enough teams and 32 teams. I said, instead of like setting up 2 leagues with like, 2 divisions each or 4 divisions each, maybe I want to set up like 3 leagues or 4 leagues, with 8 teams each, and just see how they would have competed differently. And I might have some like transaction rules that I tweak with. Maybe I'll make a couple of trades. Use mostly the same roster, but make a couple of trades that would have happened. Or maybe reverse some trades that happened so that they don't happen. Maybe there's some injuries that I want to get rid of. Maybe there was one guy was like lost for the year or something, and I want to bring him back. Or maybe I just have some players that can go through waivers because, somebody had a little too much talent, and I want to make sure that that player gets a chance on a different team. I'm going to do just enough with those transactions to kind of bend the timeline. And maybe I'll do something like a configuration change of the whole league, right? Maybe it goes through expansion, or maybe I roll back some expansion. Maybe I do some division changes. As long as I kind of keep it still feeling like that era consistency. Because remember, the main key here is I'm trying not to break the season. And I won't do all of these things. I might do one of these things in a what if project. I want to make it my own. I want to own it. I still want to take that kind of memory that I have, but I want to give myself a reason to care again. Not because I forgot the story, but because now I want to bring that story back to life. And we'll talk a little bit about like some of the projects that I've done and how I've kind of played this out. But first, let's kind of bring it home first. So summarizing, a pure replay is kind of like listening to the album exactly as it was released. That all-time greats league, that's the greatest hits compilation. That fictional league, that's me writing my own songs. But most of the time, I'm creating a mixtape. And to me, a good mixtape, it's not all about just having the hits. I'm going to have some deep tracks in there. I'm going to have some personal favorite songs that other people might listen and say, why'd you pick that one, right? I'm going to do it the way that I want to see it play out. I'm going to put those songs in the order that I want to have them be in. And really what I'm doing there is I'm not really trying to preserve history perfectly. I'm not trying to stack the league until it becomes like a video game either. And I don't necessarily want to build everything from scratch. I'm kind of curating it. Keep the players, keep the era, keep the texture, but reframe it so it becomes mine. So if you've ever kind of started a replay and stalled out, like this might be the approach that is a simple fix for you. Just take it, make one little twist. Change one little variable. Take that one decision that kind of gives you the ownership without losing the whole identity of your season. So what are some places that I've been able to do this, And let's look back at some of my recent projects, and we'll talk through a little bit about like where I took it and said, you know what, this isn't really just a replay of the season, right? I'm not just doing a historical replay here, but I'm actually changing up the project a little bit. Start with the 2024 Mets project that I recently did. Now, I was going to be to the focus of today's podcast, but I'll probably save it for next week and do like more of the retro on that. What did I change about the 2024 Mets replay? Well, I used, first off, History Maker Baseball and used the game day results. So for the Mets, as I was managing them, I had to deal with the different intangibles that were thrown at me from the game day results. That started to change the way history played out a little bit. I also went with my own lineups and my own rotation, and I stayed within the limits. Using History Maker Baseball, I can know who's a full star, who's a semi-star, who has no star. And I would play around with the rosters a little bit that way too. There were lots of guys that they used that I never got to. I didn't need them. I was able to manage my bullpen with a few arms and not have to worry about digging deep into 20 or 30 different relief pitchers like they actually used in 2024. I was able to keep that to a smaller focused group of folks. So that's what I did. But I kept I played their schedule. I played their as-is schedule. There are teams that they played their as-played lineups, right? Everything from that point kind of stayed the same. What I changed was how I was managing the New York Mets. Another baseball project that I had done was my 1985 Mets with Tom Seaver. Now, after the, I think, 83 or 84 season, I forget which one it was, Tom Seaver was lost to the Mets. They made him available in one of the Rule 5 drafts or whatever it was, and he got claimed, and he was taken away from the Mets. And really, it was a bummer, right? Because, in 1985, he ends up winning his 300th game, and he wins it as a member of the Chicago White Sox. It shouldn't have happened that way. So for my what if project, I said, you know what, this Mets team was pretty good, and he could have been one of their starting pitchers. He pitched well enough that year that he would have been one of their starting pitchers. So what if he made one of every 5 starts for this team? And I just gave him a spot in their rotation and played out the season as if Tom Seaver had still been on the Mets. Replaced, another starter, I forget who it was, but just took another starter off of their team and put Tom Seaver in that place. And got a chance to play that season out. Only variable that I really changed was Tom Seaver. Everything else stayed exactly the same. I tried to do a lot of the same things. But for that one, I changed it. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a feel for the different types of ways that I would, run through some of these. And I like to do that. And I try to make it so that when I replay a season, it doesn't have to feel like it's a complete historical replay. I'm not looking to just rewrite the book. I want to write my version of that story. I want to see it play out just slightly differently, but still be true enough that I can still see that season in the context of the project that I'm running, even if I'm not expecting it to be a 100% aligned approach. You can do this with any sport, right? You can switch around the rosters. I've done things where I've set up relegation type leagues, and I've even had it where I took rosters and I said, let's see if I, started with this roster and I want to play this team 5 years from now. What would their roster have looked like over those 5 years so that I get to a new historical point? Still going to pick that same year, right? Maybe I'm taking my 86 Mets and saying, what would they look like in 1990 if the team hadn't completely reworked the roster? Could they have been a different team with those players that they had? It's worth a shot, right? See what it looks like. Maybe it's an NFL season and I want to change the division alignments a little bit. Why is Dallas in the NFC East? They don't belong there. Let's move them out. Let's move somebody else in. Why were the Chicago Cubs playing in the NL East? Let's move them out, move somebody else in. What if somebody had drafted differently in the NBA? Maybe Michael Jordan should have gone number 1. What if he's on this team instead of the Chicago Bulls? What would that look like? There's all of these interesting kind of what ifs that you can do. And it doesn't mean you're completely reworking everything. It just means that you're changing a couple of variables here and there. Maybe you want to run a baseball season from the 1930s, but run a designated hitter. Or maybe you want to run last year's season and say, nope, no designated hitters. We're going to do this with just pitchers batting. You can do those things. Maybe you want to run NFL season from the 1970s, but you want to bring the 2-point conversion into play. Go for it. See what it looks like. Change that one variable, maybe 2 small variables. Change something big, but don't completely rework things. And it was a lot of a reason I went and created that Negro League set too, right? I could have created that set that I made available for free through Play and said, let's just do this where you can play that league alongside the major leagues. No, the way I wanted to approach it was, what if integration took place 10 years earlier? What if instead of waiting for Jackie Robinson, Major League Baseball saw guys like Josh Gibson and said, this is the time for us to integrate these two leagues. Let's do this now. And I took advantage of that. And now I'm getting to bring just 2 or 3 players from the Negro Leagues onto each Major League roster and just, see what it looks like. Because to me, that's an interesting tweak. And it tells me a different story now all of a sudden. But for the most part, the context of the seasons are going to be the same. So those are the kind of fun things you can do when you decide to do like a what if project. And it doesn't have to be a major shift. It just means what if this 1 or 2 thing has been different. I can remember years ago running a project where I wanted to see, I think it was like the 1954 season. I want to say it was the 1954 season with, the old song phrase, right? Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. What if Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Duke Snyder, the 3 cornerstone center fielders from those 3 teams in New York, switch teams? What would that have looked like? So these really interesting twists that you can pull into like a what if project. So that's really what I tend to go after with the what if projects, is just tweaking those just a little bit. So listen, I was a little bit behind on getting this week's episode out, did a little bit of travel over the weekend, felt like this was a good opportunity to do it. So this was an interesting topic that I wanted to make sure I touched on, and figured it was a better way to get through with a short week. And I'll save the next one for next time. So let's come back and wrap up today's episode. Now listen, here's my prompt to you, right? If you're a pure historical replay player, keep doing your thing. I mean, I think people who are in that space are doing some really great work on projects. And I think it's great that it exists in the hobby. This is just me kind of explaining why my projects tend to drift a little, off of the original track list. I love people who are doing fully fictional leagues. I do one myself, right, with Grid Zone. Lots of people love doing things with Scram or Baseball America or creating their own leagues for another game. It's all awesome stuff that you're doing, right? Because you're getting projects on the table. There's plenty of people doing some really good things with some, all-time greats leagues too. But if you're looking for something a little different and you're finding that you're not always staying engaged in your projects, just ask yourself, what's your mixtape rule? What are the guardrails that you are going to use to keep your replay feeling like the season, but at the same time, feeling like yours, that you own it? And if you've got some ideas, send me a message, drop a comment, post it in the groups. I'd love to be able to share a few listener approaches in a future episode. Now, next episode, we're going to do that retrospective on the 2024 Mets, and you'll hear a little bit about where I changed it, how I made it into somewhat of a what if, and why it was a slightly different history that ended up with very similar results, but wasn't exactly the exact same season that I had watched just a couple years ago. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the hobby. You can check me out. Send me an email, tabletopsportcast@gmail.com. Check out my Facebook page, facebook.com/tabletopsportcast. I usually post a couple times during the week. Try to shoot for 3 or 4 times. It's been a little light lately, mostly because I haven't gotten as much gaming in over the last couple weeks. We'll probably talk about that next week too. If you'd like to help support the podcast, it's patreon.com/tabletopsportcast. $1 a month really does go a long way to helping to offset costs for the podcast. Did add a new tournament bracket. It set up a 16 tournament bracket for the PWHL. So if you got into women's hockey through the Olympics, set up a little 6-team tournament. I think it's only 6 teams, right, for the PWHL. So I set that up, have a little tournament bracket that you can get on that file that I've shared all the tournament brackets on. So for those who are Patrons, you get access to that. And as always, even though I missed this week's episode, I would encourage you to check out my other podcast, The Play Nation, that I host with Al Wilson and Harvey Couch, where we talk all about play games. But until next time, this is the Tabletop Sportcast. Thanks for listening.